Hello, this is Bryce, and thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel, Jack of Trades. Today we're going to continue our video series building a speedrun challenge Tamiya Lunch Box. We're starting off with a stock built lunch box that we did in our previous video. And actually what I failed to mention in that video, but may have been obvious, is that it's not quite stock. I have replaced all of the plastic bearings with ball race bearings. But other than that, it was a stock truck. We did an initial run with a nickel metal hydride battery. The speed was not impressive at 10 miles an hour. So today we're going to look at doing some mild improvements to get this car faster. Some of those improvements will include swapping out that battery pack with a 2S LiPo pack. I also am going to play around with the front suspension to get it a little more level, eliminate some of that camber, and I have a couple of vintage brushed motors that I want to try out as well. We'll do some bench testing on those motors, and then we'll throw them in the car and see if there's any performance gains by putting in basically a hotter motor into this truck, and we'll see how it does. And right now this truck actually exhibits some of those changes because I'm having to reshoot this part of the video. So this is actually the end of I've already done all my filming, but I'm reshooting the beginning of the video. So anyways, on to the build. Okay, so I'm having to record audio in post because all my audio from this camera was bad. So the first step is we're going to lower the suspension on the lunch box. To do this, I'm basically moving the rubber bump stops from the bottom of the shock to the top of the shock. I'm trimming them down to the correct length here. And I'm putting the longer portion, which I'm keeping at the top of the shock. There's still a little short portion I put on the bottom of the shock. And this will basically level out the arms, giving me, and adjust the camber from positive camber to negative camber. It will also create a fair amount of toe, which I'll correct later.
Go. Trim it out a little bit. Alright, so we got 15 miles an hour. That's a 50% increase from our nickel metal hydride battery, which was giving us 10 miles an hour.
So the next step was to adjust the toe. I wanted to reduce the toe because I felt like I was losing some speed from it. It was pretty, they were pretty towed in due to lowering the suspension. So I fixed it so they weren't so bad. The next upgrade was to try out some different vintage brushed motors. The first motor that I have is a slot machine, and then the second motor that I wanted to try out was a Tamiya Dynatech 02H. Kind of off the cuff, I thought I would go ahead and do some benchmark testing on these motors to kind of see what their performance specs were. So I took all three motors, the stock motor, the slot machine, and the Dynatech. I applied 7.5 volts to each motor. I measured the current draw for each motor, and I used this RPM gauge to measure the motor speed. And what we saw in the beginning of this clip was in order for that RPM gauge to measure the motor, you have to kind of have some kind of a trigger for it. So I wrapped the pinion gear with electrical tape, and I put a little reflective flag on it. With each rotation of the motor, it triggers the measuring device. Yeah, it worked quite well actually. What I found was that the stock motor at 7.5 volts drew 1.2 amps and spun up to 17,600 RPM. The next motor that we tested was the slot machine, and at 7.5 volts this motor drew 3.2 amps and spun up to 22,800 RPM. And the last motor that we tested, the Tamiya Dynatech
CW-02H at 7.5 volts drew 2.6 amps, and this spun up to 28,600 RPM, so a much more efficient motor than the slot machine, a much faster motor. What was interesting with this motor is that as we kept running it, it was going faster and faster and faster, and the current draw was actually dropping kind of proportionally. This is probably due to the fact that this motor hasn't been run in a while, and just by running it for the first time in who knows how long, it was kind of breaking in the brushes, removing those oxide layers from the commutator and the brushes. So that was kind of interesting to watch on the bench. The other thing that I noticed with the slot machine motor was that as we were running it for that short period of time, it started to really warm up or get hot. And this is probably due to the fact that it wasn't running very efficiently. It was drawing 3.2 amps. Once I was done bench testing the motors, I went ahead and installed the slot machine into the LunchBox for some test runs, which we'll see in the next clip. Alright, so let's reset this guy. Zeroed. This is our test run with the slot machine brush motor. Well, it seems faster. The steering's very twitchy. Oh, look at that. Look at that, 19 miles an hour. So we went from 15 to 19. Zero out the GPS. Okay. Alright, crash landing. But I think we got a good speed run in there. Oh, look at that. Look at that. What did I say, 24 on the bench? I think what I'm most happy about is not the speed, but just the correlation from bench testing to real world driving. Yeah, it's basically deriving, you know, the fact that the stock motor with a bench RPM of 17.5 was giving us 15 miles an hour, and so you kind of already eliminate all the variables in the drivetrain and whatnot that you don't know, and then there's some correlation. You know, there's correlation between that and the other motors and their RPM, bench test RPMs, and the final speed of the car.
So just to recap from today, we started out by upgrading the battery from the nickel metal hydride to the LiPo, and that took us from 10 miles an hour to 15 miles an hour. Then we tried out a couple of new motors. We tried out this slot machine, which took us from 15 miles an hour to 19 miles an hour. And then we ended the day by testing out the Tamiya Dynatech 02H, which took us from 19 miles an hour to 24 miles an hour. So that is where we sit with this truck, at 24 miles an hour. So I've noticed as we keep going faster and faster with this truck that it's getting more squirrely and squirrely, and there's only so much we can do with the kind of the tuning of the front suspension. We're going to have to take some serious considerations to improving the stability, and the way we do that is looking at changes to the suspension, changes to possibly lengthening the wheelbase of the vehicle, improving the steering to remove some of that slop, looking at different tire wheel combinations, maybe even looking at making the wheels wider, putting some axle extenders in there. I don't even know if that's a thing. Well, it is a thing, but I don't know if there are upgrades for the LunchBox to do that. But yeah, I think we can get there. We just need to play around with it. That's the whole point of this journey. But there's a lot of fun work ahead of us. So thank you for watching. Have a good one.